If you have ever lived in a neighborhood where one tiny rule can set off a wildfire, you already know how fast things can spiral. Before we get into the chaos, tell me which country you're watching from. And if you enjoy these stories, do like and subscribe for more. The trouble started with something so small that most people would have ignored it. Our neighborhood followed a simple pattern every week. Trash day came on Tuesday, the trucks made their rounds, and everyone pulled their bins back in before evening. The rule existed to keep the sidewalks open, but nobody treated it like a life-or-death mission. People forgot sometimes. People traveled. People worked late. Life happened, and no one cared. Or so we thought. That changed the morning the first violation notice appeared. The bright orange slip clung to a recycling bin like a warning tag in a factory. The homeowner looked confused, then annoyed, then confused again. Their bin had been out for maybe an hour longer than usual. The whole thing felt petty, but most neighbors shrugged it off. Maybe the HOA just wanted to flex after a quiet month. The next week, 3 more homes got notices, then 5 the week after. At first, everyone assumed the HOA board was going through some hyper-compliance phase, but the notices didn't match the usual tone. These slipped into a different voice, almost dramatic, like they were written by someone who believed they were saving the community from ruining one plastic bin at a time. The wording felt personal, like the author expected applause. That's when rumors started. People whispered about an anonymous tattletale. Someone inside the HOA or with access to the camera system. Someone slipping around at night, scribbling reports, timing when bins were collected and when they were still outside. It was too consistent to be random, too targeted to be a coincidence. The board denied involvement. They claimed the forms didn't come from them. They insisted nobody had authority to issue warnings except elected officers. Yet, the warnings kept coming. Always unsigned, always slipped onto bins or taped on front doors. Each note had the same phrase underlined in thick pen. Community standards matter. Within a month, our peaceful street felt like it was split into camps. On one side were the people who thought rules were rules, even if the anonymous enforcer seemed obsessive. On the other side were neighbors who refused to believe a stray bin deserved surveillance-level attention. Everyone wanted to know who it was, but nobody could figure out how they were gathering their information. Then the strangest part began. The notices weren't always accurate. Some went to houses where the bins had been moved in hours earlier. Others appeared before the trash truck even made it down the street. It was as if the mystery enforcer decided the entire neighborhood needed discipline, no matter what actually happened. The HOA board held an emergency meeting in the clubhouse. The room filled faster than any meeting since the pool rules fiasco the year before. People wanted answers, names, cameras checked, policies reviewed. But the board had nothing. The president insisted they had no secret volunteers, no undercover rule patrol. Whatever was happening, it wasn't from them. That made things worse. If the HOA didn't authorize the warnings, then someone else was acting like they ran the place. And if someone felt bold enough to do that, what else were they willing to do? The tension grew thicker each day. Neighbors who once chatted easily at the mailbox now eyed each other with suspicion. People started noticing who walked past their house, who glanced at bins, who seemed too interested in the trash schedule. The smallest gestures took on new meaning. Even the quietest resident felt like a suspect. Some tried to laugh it off, some pretended it didn't bother them. But the truth was simple. Nobody likes being watched. In the middle of everything was Lily, the newest homeowner on the block. She moved in with her partner only a few months earlier, full of optimism, excited about the tree-lined streets and quiet setting. They imagined weekend barbecues and friendly neighbors. Instead, they walked straight into a Cold War built on plastic bins. Lily became one of the first people to question a detail that seemed too obvious to ignore. If the anonymous enforcer caught the exact moment bins were out too long, then they had to be watching from somewhere nearby. Not just occasionally, but consistently. That meant a window, a camera, or someone walking the streets in the early morning hours. Nobody enjoyed thinking about that. Late one night, Lily sat on her porch, watching the curve of the street. She noticed something small but strange. Every time a car passed, a certain upstairs window across the road lit up for a brief moment. The glow flickered with the blue tint of a screen. It wasn't unusual for someone to be awake, but the timing matched something she had begun to suspect. She didn't say anything yet. She wanted to wait. She wanted to observe. If someone really was tracking everyone's bins, there would be more signs. And there were. The very next morning, a family 2 doors down received a notice even though their bins hadn't been outside since the night before. The timing was off, the claim was wrong, and the handwriting matched the same heavy pen marks everyone had seen. The reaction spread quickly. Neighbors gathered in small clusters, comparing stories, checking timestamps on their home cameras, trying to figure out how long this had been happening. By afternoon, the entire street buzzed with theories. Some believed the culprit was someone retired with too much time. Others thought it was someone bitter about past rule disputes. A few pointed fingers at a former board member known for keeping binders of old community guidelines. Everything felt possible because nobody had facts. Lily decided it was time to bring her observations into the open. At the next informal gathering near the mailboxes, she mentioned the window she had noticed. The room quieted instantly. It wasn't an accusation, just a detail. But in a neighborhood already on edge, details carried weight. The discussion grew serious. People started listing other odd things they had seen. Lights turning on at unusual times. Someone walking their dog long after midnight, lingering near driveways. A car that cruised slowly past each house on trash night. The pieces didn't form a full picture yet, but they felt connected. Like a puzzle waiting for someone to snap the corners into place. That's when the first homeowner suggested something bold. If the anonymous enforcer loved watching everyone so much, maybe it was time for the neighborhood to watch back. The next morning settled over Maple Glen, with the slow, uneasy quiet of a neighborhood already on edge. Residents moved their bins back with exaggerated care, as if every scrape against the pavement might summon the unseen watcher again. The tone of the block had shifted. People weren't acting like neighbors. They were acting like suspects. Word of the anonymous tattletale had spread past the usual gossip loops. Even homeowners, who normally kept them to themselves, now lingered at the ends of their driveways, glancing around, checking who looked jittery, who avoided eye contact, who wheeled their bin in too fast or too slow. The whole community felt observed, and everyone hated it. The HOA board pretended everything was normal, but it was clear they loved the sudden sense of power that came from receiving anonymous compliance reports. The president, Marla, acted as if she were running a military base instead of a suburban street. She walked through the neighborhood with a clipboard each morning, jotting down notes that didn't need to be taken. Her presence added fuel to the fire, making everyone more convinced that someone among them had secretly appointed themselves the neighborhood enforcer. By noon, 3 houses had already formed quiet alliances. Small clusters of residents whispered behind hedges and in open garages, discussing theories. Some believed it had to be a long-time resident, someone who knew everyone's routines well enough to spot a bin left out for even a few extra minutes. Others were sure it was a newcomer, someone trying too hard to impress the HOA. No one agreed on anything except one truth. Tension was tightening around Maple Glen like a drawn string. Theories multiplied faster than anyone could keep count. A few families dug through old HOA emails, searching for patterns. Some set up cameras pointed toward the street, hoping to catch the mystery reporter in the act of photographing bins. One resident even staked out their front window with a pair of binoculars, convinced the culprit walked the streets at dawn. Late in the evening, the first real accusation landed. A homeowner named Paul suddenly became the prime suspect after someone claimed they saw him taking pictures near the cul-de-sac. It didn't matter whether it was true. The rumor alone shifted half the neighborhood against him. Quiet hostility followed him for the rest of the day. Doors didn't open when he walked by. Conversations ended when he appeared. He tried to laugh it off, but the more he denied it, the more suspicious he looked. The paranoia spread like wildfire. People stopped trusting even their closest neighbors. Group chats filled with theories and blurry screenshots of figures walking near recycling bins. Small, meaningless observations became evidence. Every normal movement looked guilty. The neighborhood was unraveling under the pressure of a mystery no one should have cared about this deeply. That night, many residents kept their blinds cracked, watching the sidewalks. Motion sensors flicked on all over the block. The entire street buzzed with the low hum of people waiting, hoping to catch a shadow in the act. Everyone expected the anonymous reporter to strike again, and Maple Glen was ready. The next morning delivered exactly what everyone feared: more reports. Not one or two, but 8. Each complaint targeted a different property. One bin was supposedly 6 inches too far from the curb. Another was angled inappropriately. A third blocked a storm drain. The reports were petty, specific, and clearly made by someone who had walked the street alone while everyone slept. The HOA sent out a mass warning email reminding residents that continued non-compliance may result in fines. It did nothing except pour gasoline on the fire. People now believe the anonymous reporter wasn't just trying to enforce rules, they were enjoying it. Outrage swelled all day. Everyone felt watched and controlled. The only strange comfort was that no single household was targeted. The complaints were scattered, random enough to keep everyone guessing. If anything, that made the culprit even harder to identify. That evening, something changed. A small group of neighbors gathered at the end of Pine Circle, pretending to talk about landscaping. Their real purpose was obvious. They were planning a coordinated stakeout, determined to expose the mystery enforcer. They spread out assignments. Some would watch from windows. Others would walk casually outside at intervals. A few would monitor the new street cameras. They believed they were closing in. But the anonymous reporter must have sensed the rising pressure because no new reports arrived the next day or the day after. It didn't calm the neighborhood. The silence only made things worse. People interpreted the break as strategy, not mercy. The culprit was watching the watchers, waiting for the right moment to strike again. End of the week, everyone had convinced themselves that they were moments away from the truth. Suspicion sharpened, tempers thinned. A few residents who normally avoided HOA drama were now deeply involved, combing through timelines and tracking which neighbors took early morning walks. The energy in the neighborhood shifted from frustration to full-on obsession. Maple Glen wasn't trying to solve a problem anymore. It was hunting someone. And the anonymous reporter, whoever they were, seemed to enjoy staying one step ahead of everyone else. The neighborhood was ready to snap. And on Friday morning, it finally did. Just after sunrise, an unexpected letter appeared in every resident's mailbox. It wasn't from the HOA. It wasn't official. It wasn't even handwritten. It was addressed simply to the neighborhood. No one knew who delivered it. But once it was opened, Maple Glen would never go back to normal. The quiet before the storm was over. The neighborhood woke up the next morning with the same uneasy energy it had carried for weeks, but the tension had sharpened overnight. The hunt for the anonymous HOA bin reporter had shifted from a private irritation to a community-wide obsession. People no longer walked their dogs without glancing over their shoulders. They no longer waved at each other with the same ease. Every gesture seemed suspicious. Every glance felt calculated. The mystery had turned the entire block into a stage, and everyone had stepped into a role they never asked for. In the midst of that strange new atmosphere, the HOA president gathered the board for an emergency meeting. The night before, another report had come in, this time targeting a household that had never once been out of compliance. That alone was enough to rattle the board. Someone was filing complaints without even checking whether the bin was actually left out longer than allowed. The system was being abused, and the board couldn't ignore it anymore. There was no thrill in these meetings now. The room felt heavy, like the mystery itself had seeped into the walls. Papers were laid out across the table, each one a printed version of the anonymous submissions. The board members studied them like detectives sorting evidence. They compared phrasing, timestamps, and even the tone of each report. No one would say it out loud, but they were treating these reports like clues in a crime they couldn't quite define. Outside the meeting room, word spread that the board was escalating its investigation. Residents clustered near mailboxes, driveways, and front lawns, speculating in whispers. Some were amused by the chaos, convinced the whole situation would blow over. Others were deeply frustrated, tired of being monitored by an invisible neighbor who seemed to enjoy the power of calling them out. The households that had been targeted the most were especially on edge. They replayed the moments when they'd taken out their bins, wondering if the reporter was watching from behind curtains or from a second-story window. The idea that someone was paying such close attention to their routines made them feel exposed in a way they'd never felt inside their own neighborhood. That evening, a group of longtime residents gathered at a cul-de-sac to talk the situation through. They didn't want a witch hunt, but they also didn't want to live in fear of a neighbor who could report them at any moment. They shared theories, piecing together bits of gossip and fragments of overheard comments. One resident mentioned seeing a porch light flick on every time someone rolled their bin in late. Another recalled hearing the sound of a phone camera late one night. Nothing was confirmed, but the rumors moved swiftly, feeding the growing paranoia. The anonymity of the complaints only made things worse. Without a name or face, everyone became a suspect. The quiet couple at the corner, the retiree who spent most afternoons gardening, the new family that kept to themselves, even the HOA board members. No one trusted anyone completely. The community, once relaxed and friendly, now felt like a puzzle with pieces that didn't quite fit together. The HOA wanted order, so they announced a new plan. They would install temporary cameras near the shared bin area and key intersections. The idea was to identify the person filing reports by tracking unusual activity. Some residents supported the plan. They believed it was the only way to put the mystery to rest. Others hated the idea of cameras watching their daily movements. It felt intrusive, but they understood why it was happening. As the cameras went up, the tone of the neighborhood shifting once more. People walked differently, knowing they were being recorded. They adjusted their routines, making sure their bins were placed exactly where the guidelines specified, even if they had never cared before. They read the rules more closely, wanting to make sure there was nothing the anonymous reporter could latch onto. But compliance didn't bring comfort. It only magnified the feeling that someone was waiting for the slightest slip. Meanwhile, the anonymous reports didn't stop. If anything, they increased. The mysterious reporter became more active, submitting complaints earlier in the morning and later at night. The board noticed the pattern and realized the person was watching the neighborhood almost constantly. That realization troubled them deeply. This wasn't just a stern neighbor trying to uphold standards. It felt like an obsession. The board drafted a warning to all residents, urging them to avoid escalating the situation and to let the investigation play out. They wanted to reassure the community, but the letter had the opposite effect. People interpreted it as confirmation that the reporter was someone they'd never suspect, someone close, someone familiar. Late that week, a storm rolled through the area. The wind knocked down branches, tossed recycling lids into the street, and scattered debris across yards. Many residents kept their bins near the garage instead of placing them curbside, uncertain whether the weather exempted them from the rules. The next morning, as the storm faded, people emerged cautiously to assess the damage. That was when the HOA received 5 new anonymous complaints, all time-stamped within minutes of each other. The timing didn't make sense. No one would expect strict compliance during a storm. It felt like the reporter was trying to provoke the neighborhood. The board called a second emergency meeting. They scanned through footage captured by the new cameras, determined to find something, anything that might reveal who was behind the reports. Hours passed with no luck. Then near the end of the footage, they saw a figure walking along the sidewalk during the storm, wearing a hood, and stopping in front of each house that later received a complaint. The footage wasn't clear enough to reveal a face, but the body language was distinct. The person walked with purpose, occasionally pausing to look at their phone before moving on. It was enough proof for the board to know the reporter wasn't acting out of concern for rules, but out of personal motive. The board kept this information quiet, not wanting the neighborhood to erupt. But residents sensed something had shifted. The energy changed again. People noticed the board members moving with a new level of urgency. They noticed neighbors watching each other more closely. They noticed conversations stopping when someone else approached. The search for the anonymous reporter wasn't just a curiosity anymore. It was becoming a turning point for the entire neighborhood, a mystery that threatened to unravel the fragile trust that still existed among them. And as the week ended, the board prepared to take the investigation one step further, a step that would pull the entire neighborhood into the unfolding drama. The neighborhood woke up unsettled the morning after the board's emergency email, and the shift in the air felt heavier than a simple rule reminder should have caused. Tension gathered on porches and across driveways as people lingered outside longer than usual, pretending to water plants or clean garages so they could exchange quiet looks with passing neighbors. The mystery reporter had become a ghost everyone wanted to catch, and the fear of being the next one targeted hung over the community like fog. By mid-morning, the HOA inbox filled with angry replies demanding answers. The board didn't respond, which only fed the frustration. People wanted accountability. They wanted transparency. Most of all, they wanted someone to blame. Suspicions spread like wildfire, and everyone became a possible culprit. Some residents walked their dogs with their cameras facing outward, as if hoping to record the traitor. Others left their bins out longer on purpose, just to provoke a reaction. The pressure built until even the most patient neighbors felt uneasy. It reached the point where the board's silence was seen as complicity. So when Ms. Hargrove finally stepped outside, wearing her usual sun hat, eager to sweep her walkway for the third time that day, 3 different people across the street watched her and wondered if she was the one sending in the anonymous complaints. She noticed them staring and tightened her jaw, feeling cornered but refusing to show weakness. She swept faster, as though she could push the tension off her property one leaf at a time. That afternoon, a small group gathered around the community mailbox, pretending to check their letters. They whispered theories with their backs to the street, lowering their voices when anyone walked past. The nervous chatter built a cycle of speculation that grew more dramatic with each retelling. Then, someone tossed out a claim that a neighbor caught a shadowy figure near the bins late at night. No one knew if the story was real, but the effect was immediate. The entire group turned toward the row of houses on the hill where porch lights stayed on the longest. The suspicion shifted like a spotlight. Meanwhile, inside his garage, Alan set up his own small investigation center. He spread out notes on a folding table, listing each resident and marking their habits, temper, and likelihood of using the HOA as a weapon. What began as curiosity had turned into a personal project, maybe even a challenge. The mystery fascinated him. The clues were thin, but the pattern had to be buried somewhere in the details. He studied timestamps, weather patterns, and trash pickup cycles as though he were tracking a criminal. He didn't realize how deep he had gone until hours passed without him noticing. In another corner of the neighborhood, the Thompsons adjusted their backyard camera to face the street, convinced the reporter was walking past their home every Tuesday morning. They told themselves it was precaution, but there was a nervous excitement behind it. Catching the anonymous complainer had become a trophy hunt. The neighborhood didn't want peace anymore. They wanted justice. And justice to them looked like exposing someone and forcing them to explain themselves publicly. By sunset, frustration reached its boiling point. People found reasons to walk past one another's houses, hoping to catch a suspicious look or guilty fidget. Even simple actions were magnified. If someone glanced too quickly at a garbage bin, they were suddenly suspect. If someone avoided answering questions, they became a topic in the next neighborhood text group. A community that once prided itself on friendliness now felt like a detective grid where no one trusted anyone but themselves. The board scheduled a mandatory meeting for the next evening. The announcement email carried a tone of forced calmness, claiming the topic was community cooperation, but everyone knew what it was really about. The anonymous reporter had pushed the neighborhood to its breaking point, and people needed answers. They needed closure. Eyes sharpened with anticipation. For some, the meeting felt like a chance to restore order. For others, it felt like a showdown. The night before the meeting, the tension peaked. The usually quiet cul-de-sac buzzed with activity. Porch lights stayed on later than usual. Curtains moved as people peeked outside. A few residents walked the streets with their pets, hoping to observe behavior that might reveal the truth. Even the sound of a normal trash bin closing echoed like a warning shot. At one point, someone spotted a neighbor taking a photo of a recycling bin. The rumor spread within minutes. People wanted to confront him, but before they reached his house, they learned he was just documenting damage caused by raccoons. The misunderstanding spiraled into a full-blown debate at the playground, where residents gathered to release tension under the guise of supervising their children. Accusations spilled out faster than reason could catch up. Every hour felt heavier than the one before it. By the time dawn approached, a few people admitted they couldn't sleep. They rehearsed questions they planned to ask during the meeting. Some prepared speeches demanding transparency. Others drafted theories they believed would pin down the anonymous reporter once and for all. The next day moved slowly. Homeowners waited with restless energy as the meeting hour approached. People watered lawns twice just to pass the time. Delivery trucks caught stares from porches. The neighborhood buzzed like a hive shaken too many times. When the meeting finally began, the clubhouse filled quickly. Chairs scraped, papers rustled, and the hum of whispered conversations filled the space. The board sat stiffly at the front, trying to look composed despite the pressure. Every person in the room felt the same anticipation. Tonight, the truth would finally crack open. Yet, no one was prepared for how the meeting would actually unfold. As the board began its presentation on cooperation and unity, an unexpected sound cut through the tension. Phones buzzed in unison, alerting every resident at the same time. People pulled out their devices, brows tightening as they read the notification. A new anonymous report had just been filed. And this time, the complaint wasn't about a trash bin. It was about a resident attending the HOA meeting itself. The room erupted with noise, confusion, anger, panic. The timing made it unmistakable. The anonymous reporter was inside the clubhouse, and everyone knew the meeting had just changed direction. The neighborhood woke up to a strange mix of tension and curiosity the following morning. The air felt heavier, as if everyone sensed that the hunt for the anonymous HOA paddler had reached a breaking point. By now, nearly every resident had formed their own private theories. Some whispered that it had to be someone retired with too much time. Others insisted it was a bored parent who treated the HOA app the way someone else might treat a game. A few even floated the wild idea that the board itself might be manipulating reports to enforce stricter rules. The start hook had already been laid in the earlier chapters, with viewers encouraged to say where they were watching from and to subscribe for more stories, so the momentum carried forward into the stage of the growing mystery. The HOA board scheduled another meeting, this time insisting on mandatory attendance. The word mandatory only fueled the drama. People arrived with crossed arms, suspicious eyes, and the kind of tight-lipped tension that made it clear no one trusted anyone anymore. By the time everyone settled inside the clubhouse, the room was thick with silence. The board president stood at the front, clutching the stack of printed reports. He claimed he had narrowed down the possible suspects based on patterns in the timestamps, the proximity of incidents, and the digital footprint left behind. His tone was calm, but his eyes kept darting from one resident to another, searching for a twitch or flinch that might reveal guilt. The neighbors leaned forward, waiting for him to identify the culprit. But instead of naming someone, he made an announcement that stunned the room. The HOA had installed new tracking software. Any new bin violation reported from this point forward would expose the login source automatically. It was set to go live immediately. The reaction was instant and heated. Some residents cheered, relieved that transparency would finally force the tattler into the open. Others protested, calling the new system invasive. A few pointed out how the HOA had introduced it without a vote, sparking frustration that the board might be overstepping. Lines were forming, and neighbors were choosing sides without even realizing it. The board claimed the change was necessary to stop the chaos, but beneath the surface, everyone sensed something deeper. The tattler never made mistakes. Their reports were precise, timed perfectly, and almost strategic. Whoever they were, they operated with patience and diligence that bordered on obsessive. It left everyone questioning how the tattler would react now that their anonymity was being threatened. The meeting ended on uneasy terms. People filed out in quiet clusters, whispering about which neighbor looked the most nervous. The situation no longer felt like a simple rule enforcement issue. It had turned into a psychological cat-and-mouse game played across the neighborhood, with everyone watching everyone else. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the roofs and cast long shadows across the houses, a sense of anticipation settled in. The software was now active. One more report would reveal everything. Residents took extra care to bring in their bins early. Some even double-checked neighbors' bins, hoping to avoid giving the tattler another opportunity. Yet, there was a heavy sense that someone, somewhere, was already planning their next move. Around midnight, motion lights flickered on throughout the neighborhood. A few residents peeked out their windows, expecting the worst. They watched as a shadow moved near the curbside row of trash bins left out by a family who had returned late from a trip. It wasn't clear whether the figure was just walking their dog, taking a stroll, or something else entirely. But the movement was enough to make those watching press their faces closer to the glass. The tattler's pattern suggested they operated at odd hours. It was the perfect time for them to strike again. Yet as the night dragged on, no new report came through. The HOA app stayed quiet. No alerts, no complaints. Just a strange, heavy silence. Morning arrived with a renewed wave of restlessness. Neighbors checked their phones before they even made coffee. Still nothing. People gathered outside, watching one another with wary eyes. Some wondered if the tattler had gone into hiding. Others feared they were simply waiting for the perfect moment. Then, just when everyone began to relax, the board president posted a cryptic update in the community portal. It said a new bin violation had come in overnight, but the system had flagged an error. No login source had been captured. The tracking software had failed on its very first test. The reaction was instant and heated. Some residents cheered, relieved that transparency would finally force the tattler into the open. Others protested, calling the new system invasive. A few pointed out how the HOA had introduced it without a vote, sparking frustration that the board might be overstepping. Lines were forming, and neighbors were choosing sides without even realizing it. The board claimed the change was necessary to stop the chaos, but beneath the surface, everyone sensed something deeper. The tattler never made mistakes. Their reports were precise, timed perfectly, and almost strategic. Whoever they were, they operated with patience and diligence that bordered on obsessive. It left everyone questioning how the tattler would react now that their anonymity was being threatened. The meeting ended on uneasy terms. People filed out in quiet clusters, whispering about which neighbor looked the most nervous. The situation no longer felt like a simple rule enforcement issue. It had turned into a psychological cat-and-mouse game played across the neighborhood, with everyone watching everyone else. But the most dramatic turn was about to land. A message appeared on every resident's phone, sent anonymously through third-party service. The text was short, cold, and unsettling. It read, "You're all looking in the wrong direction." The neighborhood froze. Every conversation halted. People stared at their screens with a mix of dread and fascination. The tattler had spoken for the first time. Their message wasn't just a warning, it was a declaration. Someone anonymous was playing with the entire community, and they wanted everyone to know it. The stage was now set for the next chapter in the escalating hunt. The neighbors had only scratched the surface of a mystery that was becoming bigger and stranger than any of them could have expected. And just like that, the story shifted again, setting up the next chapter with even more tension building under the surface.
The week after the trash bin sting had the whole neighborhood walking around with the kind of charged energy you usually only see during HOA elections or after someone posts a rant on the community Facebook group. Everyone had the same goal now. They wanted the anonymous reporter exposed. Some wanted justice. Some wanted revenge. Others simply wanted the piece that had disappeared the moment the first citation had been slipped into a mailbox. By now, the fines totaled more than the HOA's annual landscaping budget, and the board was no closer to identifying the person responsible. As the new week began, the neighborhood routine shifted. People stopped letting their guard down. Homeowners watched the street the way parents watch a toddler near a swimming pool. Every sound meant something. Every slow-walking pedestrian became a suspect. Every porch camera notification pulled someone back to their phone. The mystery had turned into a community obsession, and the HOA president tried to make sense of it all, even as the frustration around her kept building. She watched residents walk their dogs slower than usual, pretending to admire lawn decorations while peeking over hedges. Others waited by their mailboxes at the exact time the mail carrier arrived, hoping to catch a citation being delivered. Some neighbors even created spreadsheets mapping every household that had been targeted, searching for a pattern that might reveal who was behind the reports. But the results only deepened the confusion. The citations were scattered, with no clear logic. Some families were fined twice. Others were untouched. Some of the cleanest yards were hit, while neglected properties stayed free of warnings. Every clue seemed to contradict the last one. Meanwhile, the HOA office became a revolving door. Homeowners came in demanding answers, explanations, and apologies the board couldn't give. A few pushed for immediate rule changes. Others wanted all citations voided. Some even asked for a full investigation, complete with officer statements and subpoenaed footage, despite having no legal grounds for such requests. The president did her best to stay calm, but she knew the collective patience of the neighborhood was thinning fast. If something didn't change, the situation would explode into something bigger. While the board tried to regain control, the residents turned their attention back to their own methods. Cameras were now positioned with strategic precision. Some angled theirs low to catch the feet of anyone approaching a mailbox. Others installed new ones facing the sidewalk. Several neighbors formed a group chat dedicated to sharing suspicious behavior. They used it to post videos, track movement, and compare notes. The chat grew quickly. Soon, the entire community, except a few who wanted nothing to do with the drama, joined the digital investigation. One homeowner captured a blurry figure slipping something into a mailbox late at night. Another found a set of fresh footprints on their walkway, smaller than average and slightly turned out at the toes. Someone else posted a time-stamped clip of a shadow lingering near their yard in the early morning. None of the evidence was clear enough to prove anything, but each snippet added more fuel to the fire. Neighbors debated theories the way people analyze conspiracy charts, convinced they were one clue away from solving the case. Even the weather seemed to match the tension. Heavy clouds hung low for days, keeping the neighborhood dim and quiet. People went outside less often, worried that stepping away might create an opportunity for another report to land in someone's mailbox. When bins were pulled in, homeowners did it fast, looking over their shoulders as if someone was watching. A few even dragged their bins inside their garages immediately after trash pickup, determined to leave no window of vulnerability. In the middle of the rising paranoia, relationships between neighbors shifted. Longtime friends eyed each other differently. Old rivalries sharpened, and those already known for drama became instant suspects. Some homeowners took offense when others questioned them, believing they were above suspicion. Others leaned into the chaos and teased their neighbors, letting the mystery fill their days with a strange kind of entertainment. The search for the anonymous reporter had taken over nearly every conversation, every social event, and every front porch interaction. Still, the reports kept coming. Every time a neighbor thought they had a solid lead, another citation showed up at a house no one expected. Sometimes the bin had only been out for a few extra minutes, not even long enough to qualify as a violation. It became clear that whoever was sending these reports knew the rules better than most. They also had a habit of striking when homeowners least expected it. The randomness made everyone feel exposed. There was no way to predict who would be targeted next. One afternoon, the HOA president called an emergency board meeting. She wanted to discuss a new idea, something that might help stop the chaos. She proposed a temporary suspension of enforcement around bin timing until the reporter could be identified. The other board members agreed in theory, but enforcing a suspension meant admitting that the situation was out of control, and they knew that admitting that would only give the residents more reason to panic. While the board debated, the community doubled down on its own investigation. They decided to recreate the reporter's pattern. Several homeowners set up mock violations by leaving their bins out intentionally for short periods, hoping to trigger another citation. When the reports came in, the residents logged every detail: time, weather, foot traffic, nearby cameras, and the exact amount of time each bin was left out. The plan was ambitious. It was also the closest the neighborhood had come to working together in weeks. The effort produced something new: a cluster of citations all delivered within a very narrow window. That told the neighbors the reporter was watching more closely than anyone expected. And, more importantly, it suggested they were nearby when each staged violation occurred. Someone living in the area was keeping track of bins with an almost obsessive level of attention. The neighborhood buzzed again, but this time with a sharper sense of direction. They weren't just reacting anymore. They were closing in. And with every new observation, the list of suspects grew shorter. By the end of the week, people stopped seeing the anonymous reporter as a random nuisance. They saw them as someone living among them, someone who could be watching at any moment. The tension reached a level where the air felt heavy even during the quietest hours. Every household sensed that the mystery was close to unraveling. But they also knew the truth, when it surfaced, might cause more trouble than the citations themselves. And the moment that would change everything was already on its way, set into motion by one homeowner who had been paying closer attention than anyone realized.
The tension in Willow Bend rose fast once the phones started buzzing with the anonymous messages. People read them in driveways, in parked cars, in kitchen corners where the glare of streetlights slid through blinds. Every message carried the same crisp line from the same unnamed sender, pointing toward a new suspect. By the time the third wave went out, the neighborhood group chat was a bonfire of accusations. Theories flew, each one more dramatic than the last. What had started as a mild search for a petty rule enforcer had turned into a full scramble, the kind where neighbors looked out their windows before stepping outside just in case someone had a phone pointed at them. Many believed the anonymous whistleblower had panicked. Instead of clearing suspicion, they kept dragging others into the spotlight and muddying their own trail. The whole community felt a strange mix of irritation and fascination. People walked slower when passing one another, reading body language with exaggerated caution. The air was thick with the sense that someone was enjoying the attention far too much. The HOA board members, who were usually calm, were now restless. They held another emergency meeting in the clubhouse, trying to decide if the texts should be traced or if they even had the authority. Most argued they needed to restore order before things collapsed into full chaos. Others warned that digging into personal devices would ignite a new war and possibly legal troubles that exceeded their comfort. Through the windows of that small room, the community's frustration could be seen sprawled across the neighborhood like a storm rolling over rooftops. The bins were still a daily ritual of anxiety. People timed their curb placement down to the minute, refusing to risk another citation. Some pushed their bins out only seconds before the collection truck rounded the corner. Others hid theirs behind shrubs until the rumble of the engine was almost at their driveway. Every house felt the pressure, and every house felt watched. It turned even the simplest routine into a small performance. The central problem, though, was that no one trusted anyone now. Those who had always smiled at each other during walks now held their gazes a little too long, measuring reactions, searching for cracks. Even small talk was different. Neighbors spoke in careful tones, testing the air before committing to any statement that might be misinterpreted. Kids picked up on the tension and whispered about spies on bikes or secret family missions to protect their trash bins. The entire neighborhood was living inside its own homemade mystery novel, and each resident imagined themselves the hero of it. Through all of this, the community's patience with the anonymous reporter thinned. The inconsistency of the accusations raised more suspicion than answers. The sudden directional shifts felt like misdirection. And the sharper the tone of the texts became, the more residents suspected that the person behind them was losing control of the narrative. They weren't guiding the neighborhood anymore, they were reacting to it. Then came the night when the fourth and largest message blast hit every resident at once. Phones dinged in living rooms and bedrooms, on patios, and in kitchens. Each notification carried the same bold statement. The whistleblower declared they were done hiding, and that the community should prepare for a reveal at tomorrow's HOA gathering. The message promised clarity and insisted the truth would reset the neighborhood. People read it twice, unsure whether to treat it as a threat or a dramatic conclusion. Screens lit up across the cul-de-sacs like beacons. Some residents shook their heads at what they saw as unnecessary theatrics, while others secretly enjoyed the suspense. One thing was certain: the next meeting would be crowded. The following morning came with a strange stillness. Everyone kept glancing at the clubhouse, wondering who would show early. The trash bins sat lined up neatly, almost perfectly synchronized across the neighborhood. For once, no one dared leave theirs out longer than absolutely necessary. It was as though the entire community held its breath awaiting for the day's events. People began arriving well before the meeting. Folding chairs filled fast, and some stood along the walls, still gripping their phones as though expecting another alert. The board members sat stiffly at the front table, unsure how to respond to the growing murmurs. No one knew what kind of reveal the whistleblower planned, or whether it was a stunt meant to keep the drama going. Even the usually confident residents seemed uneasy. The moment stretched long as the room reached full capacity. Windows fogged slightly from the warmth of the crowd. Shoes shuffled. A few whispered predictions to the person next to them. The air was thick with anticipation, the kind that made everyone hyper-aware of small sounds. Even the turning of a page in someone's notebook seemed louder than it should. Then the door opened. It was sharp, quick, and enough to pull every head toward the entrance. A single figure stepped inside. Their walk was steady, almost rehearsed. They moved straight toward the front of the room while dozens of eyes followed them with a mix of curiosity and dread. The HOA board stared too, frozen in the moment. The figure reached the center of the gathering and stopped. Their presence alone was enough to hush the entire space. It felt like the air itself shifted. Without a word, they lifted their phone, held it up slightly, and let the room absorb the meaning. Everyone recognized that phone, or at least recognized the gesture. It was the same device that had delivered every anonymous message, every accusation, every layer of chaos. The reveal had begun. But before the identity was fully exposed, before anyone could react or speak, the room leaned forward in collective silence. Everyone braced themselves, expecting the final twist of a story they had unknowingly fueled for weeks. And right in that suspended moment, with an entire community waiting for the truth, the reveal was interrupted by a sudden shift outside the clubhouse. A a noise rose from the direction of the street, a noise that made several people turn. It was the sound of bins toppling over. The week following the failed HOA ambush felt like the whole neighborhood was holding its breath. Everyone waited for the next move, certain the anonymous reporter would either retreat or double down. Yet the street stayed unusually calm. The trash bins sat neatly tucked against garages, and no new warning slips appeared. For the first time in months, mornings in Willow Bend felt ordinary again. But that calm only made people more curious about what was coming next, because everyone knew the mystery wasn't solved yet. The HOA board called for one last community meeting. They insisted the bin chaos had gone on long enough and claimed they had a new lead. Their announcement spread quickly through group chats and backyard conversations, stirring a mix of excitement and suspicion. Residents were eager to hear what the board had supposedly discovered. Many hoped the meeting would finally bring closure, while others were ready for another spectacle. On the night of the meeting, the community hall filled even faster than before. Neighbors sat closer to the front, leaning forward as if proximity alone would get them the answers they wanted. People whispered theories to each other. Some suspected the board. Others suspected newcomers. A few believed the culprit was someone no one had even considered yet. The board members walked in looking more nervous than confident. Their expressions gave nothing away, and that made the room even more tense. The president stepped forward and raised a folder filled with printed complaints. The stack was thicker than anyone imagined. Seeing it laid out made the scale of the issue clear. This was never about a few bins. It had been happening for months on a scale no one realized. The president explained that after reviewing timestamps, formatting, and specific patterns in sentence structure, they had found something consistent. Every complaint had the same subtle quirks. The choice of words, the phrasing, and the rhythm matched. It wasn't a group of people. It was one person, writing the same way every time, but trying to appear varied. The board believed they knew who it was, but they stopped just short of naming them. They said they needed one more step before making anything public. The room buzzed with frustration and impatience. But before the crowd could react too strongly, the board revealed a surprising twist. They had installed temporary motion cameras around key areas on trash nights. The footage was grainy, but clear enough to highlight something unmistakable. A single figure appeared in every clip, always walking at the same pace, always wearing a hooded jacket, and always carrying a notepad. The pattern matched every location where complaints originated, but the board still refused to reveal the identity, explaining they wanted to confirm things fully before taking action. The residents demanded answers. Months of confusion had worn them thin. At the peak of the tension, an unexpected figure stood up from the center row. It was Mrs. Pelfrey, the quiet retiree known for gardening and knitting on her porch. People knew her as gentle and private, someone who rarely engaged in neighborhood drama. No one ever suspected her of anything. She walked slowly to the front, stopping beside the board. Her face was calm, almost relieved. Without asking permission, she addressed the room with collected confidence. She explained that she had been filing the complaints the entire time. She believed the neighborhood had become too relaxed. She felt order was slipping away, and her reports were her way of trying to preserve what she thought the community was meant to be. In her mind, she had not been causing trouble. She believed she was helping. The room sat in shock. Some stared in disbelief. Others looked down, unsure what to think. The truth felt strange. No one expected someone so soft-spoken and gentle to be behind the months of chaos. But her explanation made one thing clear. She never meant to create tension. She simply didn't know how else to express her concerns. Instead of speaking to neighbors, she turned to the system she trusted. The board took a moment to process her confession. They thanked her for her honesty, but made it clear that things had gone too far. They explained that her complaints had overwhelmed the community, sparked unnecessary conflict, and strained relationships. They told her she would no longer be allowed to submit reports without speaking to the board directly first. It was a gentle consequence, but a fair one. The room relaxed once the truth settled. The mystery was finally over. The fear of a hidden troublemaker was gone. There wasn't a secret conspiracy. There wasn't a power grab. Just a neighbor who misunderstood how much pressure she was putting on the community. Neighbors approached her afterward. Some reassured her, some asked questions, others simply accepted the explanation and moved on. The tension that had built over so many weeks seemed to deflate all at once. People left the hall with lighter shoulders and easier smiles. They talked about normal things again, like weekend plans and lawn care. The storm had passed. By the next trash night, the difference was clear. Bins rolled out on schedule, no one hovered nervously near their driveway, no new warning slips appeared the next morning. What once felt like a neighborhood under surveillance felt ordinary again. The HOA board took the opportunity to introduce new guidelines on communication. They hosted small workshops on resolving concerns through direct conversation. They encouraged neighbors to connect instead of report. Slowly, the atmosphere softened. People greeted each other a little more warmly. There was a sense of unity in the air. The months of chaos had forced the neighborhood to face its own weaknesses, but it also revealed that most people wanted peace, not conflict. And as a result, the community grew stronger. The story ended not with a dramatic punishment or a shocking twist, but with understanding. The anonymous reporter was no longer anonymous. The neighborhood no longer mistrusted each other, and Willow Bend finally returned to being the calm, friendly place it claimed to be.